Opie, I've been looking forward to this one for a long time because all of our listeners not in Kitchener are going to love the guest on this week's episode because he was the guy that torched their team. I say not in Kitchener because who the hell knows if anybody in our hometown actually listens to this podcast. We put the call out how many weeks ago? Let us know where you're listening from. I think so. And the London responses started pouring in. They said, we don't read Payette. We listen to Pope and Farwell. That's exactly what we heard. You heard it here first. We got Pittsburgh. We heard from somewhere in the Eastern Conference. Was it Kingston? Anyway, and then
Barry, Bill Peel emailed us. He's from Barry.
From Barry, That's right. I knew it was somewhere in the East. Sorry, Kingston. We still love you. And then just this week, Mike, the dairy farmer from Hanover. Or is it Hanover? I heard from somebody who hailed from Hanover. They said Hanover. We used to have a cottage up in Hanover. I think it's Hanover too, right?
It is Hanover. Yes, I was once a Hanover Baron.
That's
for a couple seasons actually, and
I knew Hanover. You could help out. Definitely Hanover. Yeah. So Mike, the dairy farmer from Hanover, thanks for listening. Hey, if you're here, where did you find us? Leave a rating, leave a review, give us some feedback. Send us an email, farwellandpope@gmail.com. Tweet us @_Chris Pope, @Farwell_OHL. Glad you're enjoying this podcast everywhere except in Kitchener.
I don't know if I've mentioned it on a previous episode or not, but we should give credit to Joe. I apologize not knowing how to pronounce your last name, but Joe emailed us, and he listens from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Attaboy, Joey.
We also had Mark, who interacts with us often on Twitter. He emailed us and said, "Hey, clowns," from Drumbo. That's all it said.
Well, Drumbo knows it's clowns, let me tell you.
So, I mean, he's not wrong. I'll say that. But some people listening from wherever, but we didn't get many people listening in Kitchener. Maybe they get enough of you on the radio for 12 hours a day, and then maybe they get enough of me on broadcast because only just chiming in during the game is enough to be put over the edge. I don't know.
Okay, can we just take that back half a step and just recognize that it's not my fault? I'm sorry, I'm the last person that is available to work at City News 570 in Kitchener. And then when they don't have me on the air, they play repeats of me. Like, the worst thing in the world is when we're signing on to a broadcast with a replay of my daily talk show playing before we start our broadcast. I cannot stand it. I don't make those rules. It's not in my contract. I am a diva. I'm not that much of a diva.
No, the worst is when we sign on to that broadcast. They're replaying your show from earlier in that week. Then you do the Rangers broadcast and a post-game show. And then when I'm driving home, I still hear another replay of your show. It is Mike Farwell News 570.
Sometimes that happens. I get in the car after the game too. I'm like, who is this clown? Change the station.
Anyway, a lot of Farwell on City News.
It's a lot of Farwell. Is it going to be a lot of games? That's the question that's been discussed on Twitter this week after a Nathan Rebo slam. I mean, I don't know. Like, to me, this is a pretty damn fine open ice body check. It's late, but Ty Voigt, head down, admiring a pass as he comes over the blue line, and Nathan Rebo, the defenseman for the Windsor Spitfires, obliterates him. How many games we talking here?
That's what my tweet said, was how many games, and there's been a plethora of responses from 10 to none. It is one of those hits that's going to draw a bunch of different opinions. In my mind, the video that I saw and that I tweeted was the replay in slow motion. So it's really tough to figure out how late that hit was. But even as a former linesman who we've had on this podcast, referee, he said that, even in the slow motion, it's only one steamboat. Which he's got a point there. It's not a lot of time, even in the slow motion replay. I love it. It's a hit that we don't see as much in the game anymore. But if you're coming across the offensive blue line with your head down, admiring a pass, a defenseman is going to step up from time to time and knock you into next week.
I heard somebody say that Voigt should get 5 games for having his head down. I shouldn't make light. We can laugh a little bit because Voigt was not injured on the play, fortunately.
They brought the stretcher out on the ice.
Right. He was not seriously injured.
Yeah.
But
he got up himself and
it's scary. And this is the thing, it actually ties into what we talked about last week. You mentioned, the replay what you tweeted, the video you tweeted was the replay, which is already in slow motion. But this just goes back to what we talked about last week. And I was kind of whizzing all over the offside rules and the reviews of offsides. This is how we judge the game now, Poper, and you know that as well as anybody, that we look at things using the available technology to slow it down frame by frame, and that makes it look worse. And that's what's going to be reflected in the final judgment in all of this. I'm of two minds, because you and I have talked quite a bit during this season, and it started for me. Well, I was going to say last season, but the last season we had a season in the OHL, so 1920, where my stance on fighting has kind of swung back much closer to the middle. I had gone pretty hardcore. Let's get it out of the game, probably 5 to 10 years ago, and now I've started coming back, believing that there really is still a place for it. These are, even at this level, two healthy young men deciding they want to scrap. And anyway, but along with that, I've really come to appreciate anew the physicality of the game. And so I'm a little bit uncomfortable looking at a hit like this. And you described it. You want to admire a pass coming over the blue line with your head down? You pay a price for that in this game that we love so much. And that part of me wants to say the price should still exist. But the other part of me recognizes the game that we're playing today, the way we play it, the way we officiate it. And I think you add that up on that side of the ledger, and I'll bet you the lack of injury and the lack of contact to the head might make this as little as 8, but I'm thinking 10, and I hope I'm wrong. But that's what I think.
I think you're going to be wrong because of the fact that Rebo didn't concentrate on the head. There was no head contact. He got penalized a 5-minute major for a blindside hit. I don't think that's a blindside hit. The player was looking the other way where he was passing the puck, and he came. I think the blindside hit is more for like the head checks. And I guess he did come from where Voigt wasn't looking, so it could be a blindside. But I think if they're going to suspend him at all, it'll be 2 games. And I don't even think that's necessary, just because he could have knocked Ty Voigt's head into next week. And the way he made the body check, it was all body. He made a point to not hit the head on the check. He easily just could have went straight. Yeah, he could have went straight at him, and it would have been shoulder to head, and it could have been disastrous for the Leafs prospect Ty Voigt. But that was just a clean body check. And I don't think off the replay that it was that late. Was it a half second late? Sure. But half second late in the game of hockey, good luck.
I know. And the problem in all of this is that it dissuades and discourages players from even entertaining body checks like that. And this really hit me. And I wish I could remember. I should have written it down, like daytime game. But I remember watching one of our games. I don't think it was this season, but very recently enough anyway. And there's a player, between the net and the corner, in below the goal line in his own zone, a defenseman, and a forechecker's coming in, and like the player was essentially flat-footed. And instead of coming in forechecking and laying a body check to separate player from puck or to go after that puck, it was more of a turn my body sideways and deliver this glancing blow and then stick my butt into your hip and see if I can work the puck out that way. And that's when I realized, this is what we're turning our game into. And I don't want to be that guy. I'm not a Neanderthal. I promise I'm not a Neanderthal. But damn, I don't know if that's the kind of game I want.
I'm right with you. But I think what you're alluding to is just this year's game, because it's not the OHL you're used to. Maybe. Let's call a spade a spade. It's not the caliber of hockey that you're used to in the OHL still. And this is March 1st at the time of this recording. How many times this year have I said in a hockey game, will somebody lay a body check?
I know, it's true.
How many? A lot, right? A lot. Body checking has went out the window this year. So many times during a game, do you see a player go and try to stick check someone instead of just laying the body? So many times during a game, do you see a scrum in front of the net where the puck is loose and everybody's just got their both hands on their sticks instead of laying a guy out? You can't score if you're on your hiney. Lay him out, be physical. But that physical aspect, isn't there right now because of so many new rookies into this league. They haven't had a full year in the OHL training with OHL's training coaches and stuff to build up that muscle mass. They haven't had the off-season program issued to them for 2 summers that you normally do. So, and the development of these players has taken an absolute hacking because of this pandemic. So it's not the same game that we're watching this year that we are used to in the OHL. It's just not. And I don't think it will be until maybe next year, or this could be a ripple effect where we don't see it be the same game for about 3 or 4 years. I don't know. But it certainly isn't what we are used to in the Ontario Hockey League right now. And that goes for everything, not just the physical side, but the last couple of weeks have really stood out to me in the minimal physical aspects of a hockey game.
I'll just leave it on one more point before we move on. And I don't mean to make guilty the actually innocent, but I'm just going off the top of my head here. When you mentioned that the penalty assessed to Nathan Rebo was a major for a blindside hit, didn't we see one of those? I think maybe even, it couldn't have been in the playoffs. So late season, or maybe Greg Morellis. Am I wrong about this? And didn't he? And it was, I'm almost positive it was a Kitchener Ranger. It was a higher profile player. It was absolutely a blindside hit. More not at high speed. It was kind of along the boards between the benches, and there was a knock. But got 5 games, if I'm not mistaken, in the analysis from the league afterwards. So that's all off the top of my head. It might have been 3 games, but I'm going stream of consciousness here. I'm pretty sure it happened though.
I just think he might get a break because there was no head contact at all.
And there definitely was in the example I'm remembering.
Yeah, I hope Ty Voigt's okay. I hope that he's fine and back playing before long. But that was just a crushing body check. A great play.
I want Ty Voigt back playing because we get to see him this weekend.
Yeah,
that'd be good.
And his skating. For any Leaf fans, if you haven't seen Ty Voigt, just watch 10 minutes of a hockey game just to watch this kid skate. It's something else.
The top end, just real quick on that front.
Yeah.
I know Sarnia's not everybody knows. Look at the standings. No offense, Sarnia. Not a great team this year, at least points and standings wise, but
youngest team in the OHL.
And the high end on that team with Voigt and the 2 Nolans, Burke and Dan, like that, it's fun to watch. Nemesnikov is no slouch.
Nolan DeGursey
also a great example. Yeah. So listen, if you haven't bought a ticket to the Sarnia Sting yet, don't just look at the standings. Go watch this team. There is some talent there.
But that's what I'm talking about, because that's a perfect example, because the top end talent is great. A lot of these teams in the OHL have the top end talent, but where you expect the bottom talent to be isn't where it normally is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
So we're not seeing that. It's the
top
end guys and then everyone else.
It's the double cohort.
And there's such a gap.
Yeah.
You can see it on the ice. It's alarming almost, the size of the gap between the top guys and everyone else. There's a few rookies that have come into the league, or a few new players to this league that have come in and made things work, but there's a big pile that haven't. And they're going to have to if they want to stay in this league over the next 3 years.
That's going to be another 3 to 4 year window. You were talking about that with the body checking until the league kind of gets back to quote unquote normal. It's going to be a few years for that. Before we get on to our guest, who had a very prolific junior career and then spent some time in Europe in one of the most beautiful places, nowhere near Russia. So it's a terrible segue, but sports leagues are starting to react to Russia's invasion of Ukraine a week ago. And the Ontario Hockey League out with its statement today. I don't know how you view all of this, Poper, but for me, on the list of things that Russia needs to be punished for in response to its invasion of Ukraine, sports and anything, athletically competitive is way the hell down the list. I would just say that certainly for any player that is in the league today, I don't think that player deserves any different treatment. It's much like the Prime Minister of Canada said, love him or lump him. Our quarrel is not with the Russian people. It's with Vladimir Putin and his administration. So let's just be clear about that. I'm thinking of a Kirill Steklov from Estonia. I know not right in Russia, but let's just be realistic with what we have here and treat them as the equals in the league that they are. But if Hockey Canada and other organizations aren't taking a good hard look at Russia and whether you play tournaments there and how much you support anything going on there. I can certainly understand it. And sports is the area that we're kind of working in when it comes to this podcast. So yeah, you got to comment on Russia's role now in the world of sports.
I have no problem with any Russian player already here playing any sport across. If there's a Russian table tennis player here in Canada, I have no problem with them. If there's a Russian croquet player here in Canada, I have no problem with them. Obviously the problem is with that idiot. Because, and if you think asking Alexander Ovechkin or any of these players, they're not going to stand up. There's too much to lose at home because of what this idiot has created in his dictatorship over there. But this same idiot basically forced players to allow him to score 8 goals in an exhibition hockey game and fell down when he was going around waving to fans because he can't stand up. Sporting is so important to him. Yes, sport is at the very bottom as things that need to happen with this war on Ukraine. But those, when you take away some of the things that people are taking away, those sting him. They hurt him. He doesn't like that because Russia #1. So when you take away World Junior Championships, when you take away under 18s, when you take away women's hockey, I think it stings them. What doesn't do anything is where, I forget who it was, is going to allow them to play under the UOF, United Athletes of Russia, but not have their flag. It's the same thing.
Welcome to the IOC, though. I mean, come on.
Criminal as criminal can get.
That's bad.
When it comes to the CHL, there was talks this week that the CHL may not allow teams to draft Russian players in the import draft. And I go to our former guest and pioneer in this game, Sanaya Saperji, because why try to say something when someone else has already said it best? And she put out on Twitter that's great, but that's kind of playing into Putin's hand. That's exactly what he wants. He doesn't want athletes to leave Russia. He wants athletes to stay in Russia, play junior in Russia, graduate to the KHL and never leave, because then he can control you. So to not allow them to be drafted to come over here to play kind of plays into his hand. I think he's an idiot, but I don't hold any ill will, obviously, to the Russian athletes.
I'll tell you what, and this is for certain. I'm going to be we will be in 3 different hockey arenas this week for junior hockey games. And I am going to have in the back of my mind how goddamn lucky I am to be standing in a hockey arena, broadcasting a game, having a good time when people in Ukraine are cowering from airstrikes and other bombs going off in their neighborhoods. I cannot even imagine. I don't recall it feeling so close as it does today with what's going on over there. So freedom, baby. Oh, I am so grateful for you.
I think it feels close because you're seeing men saying goodbye to their families, having to stay in Ukraine to fight. You see professional athletes like the Klitschko brothers, heavyweight champs of the world, going back to Ukraine to fight.
How's Vitaly the mayor of the one town? I'm like, what the?
Probably because he walked in there one day and said, I want to be mayor.
Maybe.
And nobody said anything.
Yeah.
Because he would destroy the entire city.
It's awesome.
Awesome. I think it's great. And just an unbelievable boxer, huge human. But he's going back to fight for his country because of what's happening. You want to talk about what we have in this country and what's going on. Do we have our problems? Yes. But we got morons parking trucks in our nation's capital saying we want freedom. Buddy, I'm going to a hockey game. I could go to the store right now and have a beer. Talk about freedom. Take a look in the mirror. Man, I think that's why it hits closest to home, because we've had people in our country screaming that we don't have freedom. Meanwhile, you look across, there's people in Canada, there's athletes in Canada that are abandoned from their families in Ukraine and Russia, sitting here in tears, wondering if they're going to ever talk to their family again. And we're worried about price of gas.
Yeah. All right. A little bit of perspective, and now we can get on with some enjoyment of the stories that come from this game that we love so much. And again, I got to say, the shade I tried to throw at our local listeners of this podcast notwithstanding, I know fans in Kitchener remember him well. He mentions in this conversation the battle that was the Plymouth Whalers for him and his teams back in the day. But obviously there is one big story associated with this player. It has been told in different ways from different guests on this podcast before. And as soon as you hear Chris mention this man's name in the introduction, you'll know what story we're talking about. And this time we get to hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
I wasn't even going to say that word. I wasn't sure.
Oh,
well, you're fine.
You can. There's a town in Newfoundland named that.
Yeah, I know. That's very fair. That's very fair.
Yeah.
Shout out to everyone who listens in Newfoundland. Thank you. For our listeners, Newfoundland. Simple. Newfoundland.
It's like understand. That's how I remember. I saw somebody type it that way once. Yeah. It's Newfoundland. Understand? I've never forgotten since. Yeah.
I like that. It's not Newfoundland.
Stop it.
Anyway, this player originally from Montreal, Quebec, drafted to the Sioux Greyhounds, traded to the Erie Otters. That it was his OHL career. Yes, he added an OHL championship and then played a bunch pro, still involved in the game. A fantastic conversation. Every question leads to a story. Get your adult toys ready, ladies and gentlemen. Cory Pecker.
The first question to me, I mean, there's so much to cover, but let's start with how a kid from Montreal ends up in the Ontario Hockey League and with the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds, no less.
Yeah. So it's actually a pretty good story, and Kitchener is actually involved in this story. I grew up in Montreal, and when it was my draft year, the year before my draft year, my dad had gotten a job in Toronto. So we had a house at the time. We had a house in Toronto and in Montreal. So I was able to kind of pick what league I wanted to play in. And I was the number one rated player in Quebec, and Baie-Comeau was coming into the league. And although I'm fluent in French, I didn't really want to go to Baie-Comeau at the time. So we sat and talked as a family, and we decided that the OHL would be the better route. And the reason Kitchener comes into this is because I started finally when I said that I was going to the OHL. So I had some OHL teams come and watch. And at the time, I believe his name was, who was the GM in Kitchener? The one guy who got, there was a bad story about him. O'Mara.
There was Bob Ertl. And that would be around your time.
1997. I heard like there was a bad story about him a few years later.
I'm trying to remember who would have been O'Harrigan. No, not O'Harrigan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't O'Harrigan.
No, it wasn't
O'Harrigan. Anyways, it was we could look it up. But the GM of Kitchener came to watch me play. And I actually had one of my worst games that I had all year. And he told my mom after the game, he's like, nah, I would never draft him. I don't think he's going to do well in the OHL. And here I was, like the top rated player in Quebec. And I had a bad game. And I was so pissed because Kitchener was one of the teams I had heard about. And, at the time with no social media. So, you hear different things. But Kitchener was one of the teams that I, maybe wanted to go to. And then he's like, no, he literally flat out told my mom I would never draft him, never take him. And that's why every time I played Kitchener, I think my stats through my 4.5 years in the OHL were like, I was well over 1.5 a game every time I played Kitchener because that stayed with me my whole career.
The chip.
But yeah, definitely. But that's how it went. So we decided to go to the OHL, and then I really wanted to go to Kingston. There was Kingston, Kitchener. Windsor was going to draft me. They told my parents if I'm still there, I remember they were picking 10th. And then my dad woke up the morning of the draft. It's like, I don't want you to go to Windsor. We had some good meetings with Sault Ste. Marie, but it was so far that my parents didn't really want me going there. But I don't know, there was something about that place that made them feel comfortable, and they didn't want me to go to Windsor. So Kingston didn't take me. They took a kid, Jamie Young, I'll never forget, who never really panned out and played more than I think a year and a half in the OHL. And then I ended up going to Sault Ste. Marie.
Now, Mike likes to go in chronological order, and I'm going to immediately destroy that. So I apologize, Mike.
No problem.
Because I think there's only one question to start off for me. And that is, when you score a goal as a member of the Erie Otters for whatever time, and all of a sudden, for the first time, you see adult toys litter the ice, what is going through your mind?
So we were in the playoffs. And that year we won the OHL championship. And I believe it was like the first or second game of the conference finals. And I scored a goal. And then, one of the toys was thrown on the ice. And then the next game I scored another goal, and there was about 10 of them. By the end of the playoffs, it was like You remember when Colorado? No, it wasn't that bad. Remember when Colorado played the Panthers and they threw all the rats on the ice like in 1990? I forget what year it was, 96 or 97. Anyways, it was actually crazy because it became this like huge thing. They made T-shirts. It was in Sports Illustrated, and then the guy who owned the sex store in Erie, he was on the news and he was like saying how much he loved me and how well the store was doing. So it was really cool. It was a really cool thing that happened, and obviously people still ask me about it to this day.
We have had your former coach from that time, Dave McQueen, on this podcast, and he said that the tradition, if we can call it that, followed you all the way to the Memorial Cup in Guelph.
Yeah. So exactly. So it happened through the OHL championship. So there was a few more series. And then I think in Guelph, there was like a couple, but no, in the finals, we played Barrie that year. It was pretty crazy. And I had 25 goals in the playoffs. So that guy definitely, his story did quite well.
Were your friends and family chirping you about it? Were your friends gifting it, toys to you for your birthday and stuff after that? Or did...
So it's funny because the maintenance guys, the ice guys, no one wanted to touch any of these things, obviously. So it was pretty funny because one time we had a player, Chris Eade, who was just like, he was a great guy. He was a bit of a jokester, and he once picked one up with his glove, and then they put it in my stall and they hid it behind my helmet. And then when I went to pick up my helmet, it just came flying out. I was like kind of startled. But no, it was a pretty cool time. It was definitely a lot of fun.
McQueen was telling us that in Guelph during the Memorial Cup that he had to stop media from coming into the room once because they were all stuck on the middle pillar. So they had to put towels around. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I definitely remember that. Yeah, we had, it was a pretty crazy time. We had a crazy following even in Erie because at the time, it was the first time like they had gone that far, I believe, in their existence. And I think I remember talking to people in Erie. They actually thought we were professional, And then after we won the OHL championship, we had a parade there. Must have been about 20,000 people on the street. So it was pretty crazy. Honestly, I played in Europe. I played, in the American League, and I still talk to like Brad Boyes, Carlo Koliakovo, Chris Campoli, and these guys, all three of them had good NHL careers, and they still say the best time they ever had during their hockey career was playing in Erie that year, and it was awesome.
That's what I wanted to ask about. Since we've thrown the whole chronological thing out the window, I really have to let it go. But that being said. That's a special time. I mean, the Otters franchise with all of its previous incarnations, put that aside, you're playing for the Erie Otters when that first championship was won. Was the moment, did you feel the weight of the moment at the time, or was it only upon reflection you kind of look back and realize how special it was?
No, I think we felt it at the time. I mean, the city, there was such a buzz. I remember we were up 3-0 in the finals and we were driving back from Barrie, and it's like we kind of wanted to lose that game on purpose. But we got back 3-4 in the morning, and there were thousands of people already lining up for tickets. The box office was opening up at 7 a.m. and it was just everywhere we went. It was like me and Brad. I'll never forget this. Actually, during the finals, Brad Boyes and I, we would drive together because our billets, we were neighbors, and we got stopped by the cops. I don't know if we went through a red light or something. And the guy like comes up to our window, and we give him our ID, and he's like, "Oh my God!" He's like, "I'm not going to give you a ticket, but I need you to call my daughter." So we were on the side of the road, and we called the cop's daughter. And all like there were so many things that happened that year it was so amazing. And to be like that age, 18, 19, 20, it's before you play pro, it's such a cool feeling. And like I said, the city, the arena, even I think there was only about maybe 5,000 or 6,000 people, but literally, I mean, I played in front of 15,000, and I still remember, I'll never forget coming on the ice, like for warm up in the playoffs. And it was just so loud, and it was like a whiteout. And I still remember it to this day. I remember so much about that season and the players, and I'm still very close with the GM, Sherry Basson. I speak to him all the time. I haven't talked to Dave in a few years, but I kept in touch with him. And there's like a core group of us that still, speak every so often. Do
you have a good Bass story for us?
Oh my God, where do I start?
I should rephrase that. Can you pick only one Bass story for us?
So him and Brad and I were, obviously probably his two favorite at the time. And, we were on a losing streak. and we were going through, Peterborough and Oshawa. Anyways, we got into Peterborough, and Brad and I, they split us up. Normally we room together, but they split us up. So that night we went to bed, and the next morning we come down to breakfast, and Bass pulls Brad and I aside, and we thought, okay, like he's going to say like, we really need to win one. He's like, did you guys switch your rooms? It's like, you guys weren't supposed to sleep together. Did you guys switch your rooms? And we were like, yeah. This guy started to yell. Okay. You could have probably heard him in Sault Ste. Marie. Like I was like, he just lost his shit on the two of us. I mean, he was just, it was, I still remember that, like standing there with Brad, and he's just losing on us and spitting on us. But the Bass was awesome. Like I said, I still speak to him to this day, and his grandkids actually come to my camp. But he was great. I mean, I could tell you stories that he used to tell us, that he drafted Lindros, that he was Sakic's, he taught Sakic how to shoot. Like there were a million different stories that were just like, obviously probably not true, but we love them anyways.
Who had the best Bass impression on the team? Because I know someone in that room used to do a good Bass impression.
Oh my God. I forget, but yeah, there are some good ones. I don't know if it was Brandon Cullen. One of them had a pretty good one. And to be honest, he used to take us for dinner before every round that year. So we'd go for a team dinner. And this guy, okay, after dinner would talk. And literally it would be a 2-hour discussion, to the point where we'd have to be like, okay, Bass, like we got to go home, but man, this guy, once he gets talking, like that's it. You either cut him off or you could be there for a week. But again, I love Bass. I still speak to him. He's great. But like the amount of stories, I could be here for a week.
Yeah, I think when we had him on the podcast, we asked 3 questions. The podcast went on for almost 2 hours. That's just how it goes, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Remember, Farzy, so real quick, just Cory, we replay this podcast from time to time during our intermissions during the game, and they're about 7.5 minutes. Well, I was replaying the Bass interview the other day, and we asked one question, and then the rest of the interview was just Bass talking for 7 minutes.
That's it. And he still hasn't changed. When I speak to him, he gets me on the phone. I'm like 45 minutes. I'm like, okay, Bass, I gotta go. But
no one
I wouldn't change it. Yeah, exactly.
While we're on those stories of people within the organization when you were there, Dave McQueen, as I mentioned, also a former guest on here. And I was so glad he was, because when I was covering Dave in this league, Cory, I'll be honest, he intimidated the hell out of me. He's got this gruff voice and gruff demeanor.
Yeah.
Then he comes on the pod, and he was one of our funniest guests, hand down. So playing for him, what was it like? Was he intimidating as a coach?
So exactly what you said. He was very intimidating. I had a great relationship with him. He really kind of like changed the way I played, especially in the defensive zone. But if you were not playing well, or you got on his bad side, that voice came out, and you were like, yeah, you were definitely scared. But he was like a very fair, great coach. And like I said, I had a really good relationship with him, and I kept in touch with him for years and years after when he went to Europe. But definitely an intimidating guy. The first time when I got there, I'd been in Sault Ste. Marie for 3.5 years. I got there, and like my first meeting, I'll never forget sitting there, and I heard him speak. And, when I remember being in Sault Ste. Marie, and I would hear this, like he'd yell from the bench, and I'd be like, "Whoa, what is that?" But when you're sitting in his office and you're talking to him, and I was like, "Oh my God, this guy like scares me a bit," but which is not a bad thing, as a player. But he's a great guy. He's a great coach. But yeah, definitely a little intimidating until you get to know him.
Just to follow up there, sorry, Chris, but because we're talking about that time, you come over from the Sioux, and then you're with Dave and the Otters, and that first year you come over, it's a league trophy for most points, but no championship. The next year, like, were you building to that? Did you come into that season, your last year, with that mission?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the year before, we thought we had the team. I don't know if you guys remember Nikita Alexeyev. We had Jason Baird. I don't know if you remember these names, but we had a really, really good team. But our kryptonite was Plymouth at the time. We just couldn't beat them. I mean, they were a great team. They had a lot of great players. And the year that we won, although I think we would have beat them anyways, they happened to lose to London. So then we just felt like, we had an easy path on the way to the championship. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, because I remember after that year being like, like we let it slip away. Like, I don't think that, with the guys coming back, that we have enough. but in the end, we traded for TJ Achetti, who was a great goalie for us in the playoffs. And then we got, Bass made some great trades. And we just really came together as a team. Like, I know everyone says that, especially, in the years that you win a championship, but honestly, looking back, like we were just such a close knit group. And, we had Brad Boyes was just a great leader, Carlo Koliakvo, so we had some great leaders, we had great older guys, great younger guys. It was just, and the great coaching, and we really, everything gelled together, and we really were played great playoffs. And it was just like I said, an awesome experience for someone. I ended up playing later on in the Spangler Cup a couple times, which was also an amazing tournament and an amazing time. But Erie was definitely my most special time, during my career, for sure.
You mentioned Koliakvo. Maybe you can give him a bump for us. We reached out trying to get him on this podcast. He breezed us hard.
Oh, really? Okay, I'm going to give it
big shot now.
Yeah, I know. I'll call him though after this. I'll try to get him on. Carlo is, and I'm sure Dave. I don't know if you asked Dave about him, but Carlo is just an awesome guy. He does so much. I know he has a big job now in Toronto, but he's a great guy. He loves hockey. He loves everything about it. He's a family guy. He's a funny guy. He's a really funny guy. Yeah, he'd be a great guest too.
You mentioned that championship team and the guys you're still in connection with. Farzy and I were just talking about this the other day on one of our many road trips. But what is it about when you win a championship with guys that brings you closer? Because we often hear from people on this podcast that, I'm really tight with these guys still. And it's normally a championship team that brings those guys tighter.
I think you hear people talk about it all the time, how like those tight teams are the ones that win. I've been on other teams, like even through my time in the American League, or that when we barely made the playoffs or we didn't make the playoffs. And I don't know what it is, but like my best friends in hockey are like Carlo Koliakvo and Brad Boyes, right? Are the two guys that I won a championship with. And we still speak to Carlo Campoli, and I still speak to Brandon Cullen. And like, those are the guys that I speak to. And I don't know what it is about winning a championship, but it's definitely something that is super special. That'll last with you forever. Look, I am now 40. It was 20 years ago. And literally I can remember almost that whole year. I remember the whole season. I remember scoring my 48th, 49th, and 50th goal against Kitchener at home on second last weekend of the season. I remember everything about the playoffs. I remember Carlos scoring in overtime in London. Like it's just such a magical season. And, I think it just gravitates to those kinds of people that you're close with when you did something special.
Have you had a chance to go back and see the arena since it's been renovated?
Yeah, I went back to see McDavid a couple times.
Nice.
Yeah, Bass invited us back, me, Carlo, Brad, and Campoli. We dropped the puck. We met McDavid. And I remember saying this at the time. I think he was only 15. And I literally couldn't believe sort of what I was watching, in the sense that like every single time the guy touched the puck, it was like you just weren't watching. It's like he wasn't playing the same game as the other players. And I played as an underage at 16. And I remember thinking to myself, holy, this speed of this game. And they had guys like Legwand and Richard Jackman at the time. Like we had a lot of good players when I was 16. And I think I had I didn't play that many games, but I had like 3 or 4 goals or whatever. And then you watch this guy at 15, and it was just one of the most incredible things I've ever seen.
You've talked a lot about, or mentioned his name, Brad Boyes. What is it about Brad that made him so successful on the ice?
So Brad was someone I really respected through my career. I didn't know him much. I played with him in an all-star game before I went to Erie. And he was one of those guys that you'd always heard, was sort of a quiet leader. And at the time, I always was like, okay, what is a quiet leader? I was a guy who would like to stand up in the room and you talk when you have to talk, and you do what you do what you have to do on the ice. But when I got to Erie, I really sort of saw what a quiet leader does. And he does, all the right things. He says all the right things. He works hard. He didn't always get up in the dressing room and and talking about, whatever had to go on that game or that period. But when he did, everyone listened. And he was the type of guy who everyone followed. You know what I mean? So like if anyone touched him, the whole team got in there. He scored big goals. Like he played good defense. So I think like when you have a guy who always does the right thing, and that has the talent, those are sort of special leaders. And through the OHL, like he was a special leader. And I was a year older than him, but I really, really learned a lot from him. and he went on to have a great career. I think he had 40 goals in Boston. He had a really great NHL career, and I think now he's in real estate. But he was just one of those guys who you also would gravitate to, and you would want to, watch the way he practiced, watch the way he played games, watch the way he practiced face-offs. And I think that's what made him a great leader.
For a lot of years, Cory, after your team won that championship, there were some dismal years, let's just be honest about, for the Erie Otters organization. I can't help but think about those Miami Dolphins that had the perfect season and popped the cork of champagne every time a team gets beaten. I'm not sure how much I love that, but when you saw this franchise starting to get its feet under it again, and you knew something was coming, I suspect that you and the rest were celebrating just right along as Otters alumni that they were going to do this again.
Yeah, I remember the year. The year we went back to watch McDavid, and then they went to the Memorial Cup. And I think one year they lost in the finals of the Mem Cup. And I remember watching the game as if I was sweating, and it was like I was watching my own kid. You know what I mean? So yeah, I still follow them now. I still follow them a little bit, and I follow them on Instagram. I see the scores. I know they're not doing so well, but every time they're in it or they get deep into the playoffs, I'll definitely tune in. I feel attached to that team for sure.
This is really going to bother Farwell, but we're going kind of backwards. So I'm just curious that going back to that trade from the Sioux to Erie, was it something where you wanted to change the scenery as a 19-year-old?
Yeah. So I loved my time in Sault Ste. Marie. Dave Mayville at the time was the general manager. He was absolutely amazing to me. I had great billets. I loved it. I loved the city. It was a great place to play, to start your OHL career in Sault Ste. Marie, where you walk, everyone knows you. And it was a great building at the time, that old building. But yeah, I felt like for me, you don't get seen as much in Sault Ste. Marie, and especially back in the days when there was no social media or no nothing. So you would have an 8-hour bus trip, and then you'd play, in Toronto and Oshawa. And if you didn't have a good game, you just felt like you weren't necessarily being seen as much as the other guys. And I felt like our team wasn't, they were sort of rebuilding again. We had a good year when I was 18, and then 19 wasn't such a good year. So Dave really did me a huge favor, because I went in there to ask him for a trade. He didn't really want to trade me, but we really sort of begged him. We just thought it was the right thing for my career. And as my dad tells me, I was playing for Sault Ste. Marie in Brampton, and Bassett happened to be at the game, and he came to sit next to my dad. He's like, "I'm going to get your son." He's like, "I'm getting him in the next few days." And a few days later, that's where I went.
We haven't had enough guys from the Sioux that played there on this podcast. We're going to have to make sure we change that. But I've always been interested, because Chris and I talk about it a ton. It's obviously the longest road trip we have to make, and we only have to do it twice a season. The Sioux, as you just mentioned, every trip is an adventure. We just came from Guelph on this past weekend. It's a 20-minute trip from Kitchener, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
How do you prepare for that? What's it like doing those trips?
So I think you have to get used to it. But like I said, I think the toughest thing for me it was the OHL, right? So you would leave, if your game was Friday night, you would leave Friday, you would drive 7 hours, and you'd have to jump on the ice, so you would get used to it, but it definitely wasn't like driving half an hour, feeling good, getting on the ice, playing your game. We had a lot of 3-and-3s. So it was tough. I never liked to make an excuse about it, but it was definitely sort of, I felt like a little bit of a disadvantage compared to the other teams, closer to Toronto. But like I said, I loved my time there. Everything about the city, and to be honest, we never had a great team. I think we went to the second round once, but if you do well there, the city is just awesome. I remember watching a year before I got drafted, Thornton was there, and they went to the Memorial Cup, or they won the Memorial Cup around that time, or maybe just before that. And I saw great videos. And there was another good story about Bass. I'll tell you a quick story about that. When Bass won the Mem Cup, so they were playing Peterborough in the finals. So he always tells his story how the night before the finals, he's like, I found these women and I sent them up to Pronger's room. And the next day in the finals, he's like, Pronger couldn't skate. He was just terrible. And that's why we won. That was another good Bass story that he always used to tell us. Yeah. But yeah, it was, I guess you could say it's a little bit of a disadvantage that first game when you're driving 7 hours and have to jump on the ice. But you're a kid, right? At 16, 17, you got those young legs. So looking back, yeah, wasn't so bad.
So what was worse, all those long travel days from the Sioux, all the long travel days when you were with Erie, or all the long travel days on a bus in a sleeper bus in the American League? Because apparently your travel with hockey is something to write about.
My travel was awful because then I played in Cincinnati, which was awful. So I think at minimum, like our shortest trip was 7 or 8 hours. I'd say the worst for sure was the American League. I also didn't love the American League like I did the OHL. Like I loved playing the OHL. I really loved it. And then I loved playing in Europe. So then I went to Switzerland, and in Switzerland, that was amazing for me because the longest trip was 4 hours. So I was like, that was like incredible. That was like a dream for me. Yeah. So I'd say the American League, that was not fun.
What led you to make the decision to jump overseas?
I think at the time I realized that I wasn't going to play in the NHL, and I felt like for my career, going over to Europe was probably the best thing to do. Looking back, I played 5 years or 5.5 years in the American League. Had I known what Europe was, I probably would have left after 2. Everything about the playing in Europe was just amazing. I mean, I played in Switzerland, which was a beautiful country. I played in a great city. I played in 2 Spangler Cups for Team Canada, which was an amazing experience. It's easier on your body, not as many games. So if you're not going to play in the NHL full time, like I always say, like definitely go to Europe. But I have a few buddies that stuck it out. I don't know if you guys remember, like P.A. Parento. He stuck it out in the American League for a long time, then had a great NHL career. So I guess when you're in the American League, you're one call away from playing in the NHL. But playing in Switzerland was, I had a great 5 years there for sure.
I want to get to some of the Swiss stuff in a bit, but I want to go back to Sault Ste. Marie and your time there. As being somebody who was obviously highly touted coming into the OHL, how tough was that first year as obviously an underager and only putting up a handful of points and only getting a minimal amount of ice?
Yeah, so I actually got sick. I have Crohn's, and it got diagnosed that year. So I think I had 7 points. I think I only played like 20 games or so because I got sick in, I'd say October, and then I didn't come back until March, like at the end of the season. So that was a really tough year for me, but the organization was amazing. But yeah, like I remember even the first few games, like I was a first rounder and we had this guy, John Osborne, who was a second rounder, who was also an underage player, and he was playing a lot more than me. And I think coming from Quebec, and in Quebec, at the time you went from midget AAA, it was called, and then you went to junior. So there was no like junior A and junior B the way it is in Ontario. And I think that's a way better system because it gets you ready to play against men, where in midget, you're playing against only 15 and 16-year-olds. I think the younger kids in junior, you get to play already against guys that are 17, 18, and that sort of, I didn't have that learning curve. So when I got to the OHL, I'll never forget my first scrimmage in Sault Ste. Marie. You guys remember Richard Jackman? He was like a top pick,
Yep.
defenseman.
Yep.
Anyways, he just looks at me. At the time, he had no teeth, and he looks at me. And here I come from my like midget AAA, where I was like putting up crazy numbers. And he looks at me. He's like, "I'm gonna effing kill you." And I was like, "You're on my team. Like, what's going on here?" I remember telling my mom after, I'm like, "I don't know if this is the league I should be in right now." So I needed like a good learning curve. I needed some time, and it also happened to be one of my first games in London. You guys remember John Erskine?
For sure.
Same type of thing happened. I lined up against this guy, he looked over at me, and I almost, went to the bathroom in my hockey pants. But like, I was like, oh no, like I didn't go up against these guys, so it was all new for me. So it took me a little while to kind of get adjusted. And then I started putting up better numbers in my second year.
You mentioned Jackman and his toothless face when he meets you at that scrimmage. You remind me a little bit of Rocky Balboa, Corey. It was Rocky that never broke his nose till the fight with Apollo, and all your teeth. How do you go through a hockey career like that?
Yeah, so I promised my mom. I said because she didn't want me to go to the OHL. She was like, "You're going to go to school," and at the time, as a number 1 rated player in Quebec, it felt like it was just, they told you if you want to play in the NHL, you want to play pro, you go to junior. So I promised my mom that I would never never lose my teeth or break my nose. And I was never a fighter. I think I had, in my 4.5 years in the OHL, I might have had 3 or 4 majors, and I might have dropped my gloves once. So I always played with a good enforcer, especially in Erie. When my last couple of years, I played. You remember Brandon Cullen?
Yep.
He played in Erie. He was a big, tough guy, scored some goals. So he played on my line. So I had free reign. I would base watch guys all the time, and then Brandon would come in. But I was never a fighter. So I was pretty lucky. I never broke my nose. I never lost my teeth. I don't even think I had a concussion. So I went through 4.5 years and then almost like 10 or 11 years of pro. And I was pretty lucky. That was one of the reasons why I actually retired in the end. I was sort of like, I'm not sure if I really want to play. And then I was like, I still have my teeth, my nose. And so I'm like, all right, I'll call it quits.
Did you ever play in the famous Quebec Pee Wee tournament?
I did not. That
No?
was one of my worst. No, we lost out to the team ahead of us. And I still remember to this day crying when we found out that we weren't going. That tournament, as growing up in Montreal, that tournament was literally like winning the Stanley Cup. It was like, and I grew up watching on TV, and it was we were so excited, and we were the second best team, and we had just lost out to that team, and they picked that team to go instead of us, and we were like devastated. The two most times I was devastated in my hockey career was that, not going to the Pee Wee tournament, and then losing in the Mem Cup semifinals.
It's funny how, as much as that championship team is still tight, and you referred to it as we started today, the glory days, but those losses stay with you for a long time too.
Oh, 100%. Losing that Mem Cup game, and we were in Guelph, and to be honest, we were up 4-2 with 3 minutes to go in the semifinals against Victoriaville, who had beaten 6-2 in the preliminary round. And they scored with 3 minutes to go, 3 seconds to go. And we lost in overtime, which was Carlo's fault. If you ever get him on the show, ask him about that.
Nope.
But yeah, honestly, that was my most devastating loss. And again, like, as much as you remember the good times, you still remember those, that tough loss. But yeah, definitely remember that one. That one stung for sure.
What's it like in the dressing room after a loss like that? So heartbreaking. And after, as you said, you thought maybe the year before you guys had the team, and then to get there this year and then to have that loss.
Yeah, I mean, other than when I was like 12 years old, didn't go to the Pee Wee tournament. I never thought I would actually cry after a hockey game. But I think for me and most of the guys, I think everyone was crying, and it was, my OHL career was done, and we had lost, so it was like a double whammy. And like we were talking about, like when you have such a tight group and you're having such a great time and it's a great year, like you don't want it to end. And obviously you want it to end with winning, but so it was just a devastating loss. I remember everyone in the room. I don't think anyone said a word for about a good 10-12 minutes, and it was definitely a tough one.
That led to, as you've already talked about, the time in the American Hockey League, but how much of that time, if any, Cory, because you weren't a dummy out there or anything, but how much of that time did you spend thinking that there might be a chance with the Calgary Flames, who had drafted you in the 6th round?
So I had a choice to make after my 19-year-old year. They offered me a contract, Calgary, and I had a choice to take it and maybe go to the American League, or to decline it, go back for my overage year, and and see where I can go from there. And I decided to obviously go back, which was the best decision I ever made. I thought my best chance to play in the NHL was with Anaheim. I'm never one of those guys to make excuses. You hear a lot of hockey players, I'm sure in every sport, they're like, I got screwed, the GM, and this. But my rookie year in the American League, I led the team in goals. I think I had 20 goals, 21 goals. We didn't have a great team. And then the year after that, it was the lockout. So then all these guys, and at the time, Anaheim was stacked. They had Joffrey Lupul, Chris Kunitz, Dustin Penner. So I was like a first liner going back excited. And then I got the pecking order came in, and then, I didn't have a big signing bonus, and then Getzlaff and Perry came later that year. So I think my best shot was to play in Anaheim. But another good story I'll tell you, and I'll never forget this. My first training camp in Anaheim, Mike Babcock's the coach, and he's a rookie coach in the NHL. And here I am coming off I think I had 42 goals in the OHL. And my first meeting with him, he kind of looks at me and he's like, look, I'm going to tell you something. He's like, you're never going to be a scorer at the NHL level, ever. He's like, if you want to play in the NHL, you need to be a third or fourth line guy, win faceoffs, kill penalties. And here I am, I'll never forget, thinking to myself, like, who the hell is this guy? Like, I'm just putting up major points in the OHL. I've scored at every level of my whole life. Like, no, I'm going to play in the NHL. I'm going to score. And he was 100% right. I needed to be like a Mike Fisher type guy, third, fourth line, still kind of score goals, but like change my game to play like that. And I never did because I just, but it's funny that he was the first guy to tell me. And I remember being like, who's this guy? Like, he's just like I remember at the time, it was our first training camp, and Paul Kariya, Adam Oates, all these guys hated him because he was skating them. He was doing all these weird things. And these guys didn't want to know from him. I remember hearing that in the dressing room, but years later, I wish I had listened to him.
Maybe it's Chris Kunitz's fault. Maybe if Chris Kunitz wasn't there, then you get traded for Ryan Whitney to Pittsburgh. You get put on Sid's wing, and then you are a scorer. And take that, Babcock.
A good story about Kunitz too is his first year in Anaheim at training camp. I don't know if he didn't like. I guess his skates never made it, but he didn't really tell anyone. So he was borrowing skates. Literally, guys were laughing because they gave him like $1 million signing bonus coming out of school, and I guess they knew something that we all did. And I remember like we were all like kind of laughing. I'm like, this guy's terrible. Like, he was so bad his first few days, and everyone was like, he's awful. What did they do? And again, we were majorly wrong. And Kunitz is a great guy and had like the most amazing career. I mean, no one ever thought he would have had a career that he had, even if we didn't think he was awful. But it was just funny. I remember the first couple of days, everyone was kind of sitting and laughing at him. But I could promise you, when they were watching the Olympics, they weren't laughing at him. So
yeah.
You mentioned a little while back, Cory, that when you were with the Erie Otters, it was the Plymouth Whalers who were your kryptonite. When you were in the league, what was what rink did you go into where you felt like you played the best, and which building did you hate going into?
I mean, I guess Mississauga, because at the time, I mean, it was like a 3-4 point night every time. And my family's from Toronto, and, I'd have a ton of people there. So I'd say Mississauga and Plymouth for me, honestly. Plymouth was always like one of those places where they just, I remember my first year, Paul Mara slashed me across the face. I still have a major scar. And I had to get, so when you have to get stitches in Plymouth, or at least back then, you have to walk through their dressing room. So I remember getting hit in the first period, and it was with like a few minutes to go in the period. So I went in, the doctor stitched me up. And I remember I was like a 16-year-old kid. I had to walk through their dressing room in the middle of the intermission, and they were all sitting there. And they were all like yelling at me, and I was so scared. And I don't think I ever got over that, because I think I had one good game the rest of my career in Plymouth. So I'd say Plymouth.
That's pretty intimidating when they're all yelling at you when you're already gushing.
And I was a young kid. I was 16, and walking through that room in the middle of the intermission. I still remember that. It was terrible.
You talked about your time in Cincy, and I took a look at the roster. There's one name that stands out to me, and that's Ilya Bryzgalov.
Oh, God.
Do you remember anything about him when you were playing with him there?
So the same way I could tell you stories for about 7 years with Bass, I could tell you about a million stories about Briz. But I will tell you a great story. My first professional game, my first American League hockey game, we're playing the Griffin, the Red Wings at the time. No, not. Where are they from? The Red Wings
Grand
farm
Rapids?
team.
Grand Rapids.
Grand Rapids. Yeah.
Yep.
Griffins, exactly. Sorry, Grand Rapids. So the year before, Anaheim and Detroit, they shared a team. They all played in Cincy under Babcock. And then they split. They each wanted their own American League team. So there was a misunderstanding, or not really a misunderstanding, but I think between Sean Avery had a friend who was a Russian girl that year. And then the next year, when we came back, Bryzgalov was married to this girl. He was married to this Russian girl, and everyone was like, how did that happen? He was, she was with Avery. So our first game, we're playing Grand Rapids, and Avery's on that team. And literally on one of the first whistles, you see Bryzgalov, he gets a puck under his glove and his blocker, and he freezes it. They blow the whistle. All of a sudden, Avery goes and stands on the back of the net, and he says something that I won't repeat on this podcast. He said something to Briz. Bryzgalov throws his glove and his blocker down, and he's chasing him around the ice with his stick, like with a baseball bat. He's just trying to kill him. And that was my first professional game, and he got kicked out of that game. So that was like a good Briz story. But yeah, that guy was a complete joker. I don't know how Philadelphia, but I will tell you, when he wanted, that guy was unbelievable. But he would come to practice and he would let every puck in if it was like he didn't care, or he was the type. He was a horrible teammate. He was the type of guy who would, like, when we had like a team dinner or whatever, he wouldn't come. He would just pay the team fine. He wouldn't even like be like, guys, I'm not coming. Like, so he
That's
was.
weird.
I don't really think anyone
Yeah.
has anything good to say about Briz.
You know, it's funny because obviously you've been through a lot of hockey by that time, and you're a young man. But if that's your first professional game, did at any point it go through your head like, maybe this should be my last professional game?
It was crazy. My family there, we were laughing about it after. But he literally like threw off his glove and block and was chasing around the ice, and we were like on the bench. We were like, what's going on here? And we were a young team, But Briz did what he wanted when he wanted, and. But lucky for him, I mean, Philadelphia gave him $50 million. So.
Yeah, that was a bizarre.
You were that close to it all, Corey. You were that close to the big bucks.
Exactly. That's what we were saying. We were all like, if someone could give Brisbane 50 mil, like, I don't understand. Like, just give me 5. Like, I'll make a joke out of myself. Like,
what was that time like though? Because you look at that roster, you guys had Penner, you had Obi, Shane O'Brien, and a guy who I've heard nothing but positive things, Zenon Konopka. Like, it must have been a time.
Oh yeah, we did. I actually had an amazing time with the guys that year. Konopka was a good story, a quick story I'll tell you about him. Our first exhibition game, I'm sitting right next to him on the bench, and I didn't really know him that well. And the guy literally he was wearing no visor. He gets a shot. Okay. We're sitting on the bench. We're talking. He gets a puck right in the mouth. Okay. His teeth are all out. I'm like, oh my God, thank God it wasn't me. Okay. He's gushing everywhere. The trainers are like, all right, you got to get off. He's like, no, I'm not going anywhere. This is an exhibition game in the American League. Okay. But that is exactly the way he played, and exactly why he had an NHL career, because this guy, I've never played with a guy who had more heart. Like, he wasn't a great skater. He wasn't a great shooter. But man, this guy was a hockey player from top to bottom. And I'm sure if you talk to anyone else about him, they would say the exact same thing. If I knew how to be like Zenon Konopka on the ice, man, I would press that button every single day, because he was incredible. He would fight, and he ended up being in the American League. He actually put up some numbers, I think, later on. And then he had a pretty decent, he played for a guy who never should have played in the NHL. I think he played 4 or 5, 6 years. But an incredible teammate, and just an incredible guy with a tremendous amount of heart on the ice.
My teeth hurt just hearing that story.
Oh my God! When I say right in the mouth, I mean right here. No mouth guard, and this is the American League. I don't know where we were playing our exhibition game. It was, who knows, Cleveland or something. It's like disaster.
What was the European experience like for you?
For me, it was incredible. I played in Lausanne for most of my time there, which is an unbelievable place to play hockey. I mean, we were getting 10, 12,000 people a game there, unbelievable fans all over the city. It was like, to me, growing up in Montreal. I grew up in Montreal. I was a huge Canadiens fan. My whole childhood was about hockey, and I saw them win the cup, a couple times. And it was just like that in Lausanne. Everyone loved hockey, and being like the foreigner, being like, one of the top 2 Canadians on the team, and I had a couple great years there. Like, they treated you like, I'd walk around Lausanne like I was Carey Price. You know what I mean? So it was a really cool experience. But they're also sort of like you see with the soccer. I mean, I remember it was my first or second year in Lausanne. We were up 3-0 in the semifinals on a team that we obviously were beating handily, and the team hadn't been to the finals in years, and we lost 4 straight. And I'll never forget coming out. We lost this game 7 at home, and in Europe they give you a car with your name on it and the team logo, and everyone loved me in that city until that happened. And then I came out, my car was full of egg and milk. I couldn't even get into it. So they're very, very passionate, but honestly, it was also, other than Erie, it was just probably my most amazing experience in hockey.
Okay, wait, did I miss the part where you just said you were responsible for the game-winning goal against or something? You just lost the series.
No, I wasn't. But as the foreigners, because there you're only allowed a certain amount of, foreigners. And if you're not producing, and the other guy actually played, remember Eric Himmelfarb played in Sarnia?
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so we were the two Canadians. We had great years, and we were up 3-0 in the finals. And then I don't remember. We just blew it, and it was just like, no, they wanted. They literally, the security wouldn't let us out. Like, we had to wait 2 hours after the game until all the fans were out of there. And like I said, I got to my car, I couldn't even get into it. Like, I had to leave it there and catch a ride with someone else. But yeah, and even like the Swiss players, they kind of turn on you a little bit. But that's the way it is there. When things are going well, you're like king of the world, and when it's not, they just blame it on the foreigners because you're making more money and you're supposed to produce, and so that's the way it is. But playing in the Spangler Cup is.
Yep.
So the Spangler Cup was also an incredible experience for me. I went to the World Junior camps, but I never played on the World Junior team. So playing for Canada, like at a tournament like this was. I mean, the way they treated us was absolutely incredible. And I went the first year, we won. Curtis Joseph was actually our goalie. I became pretty close with him on the trip. And another guy who was just like, I met him, and I was just, what a humble, down to earth, amazing human that guy is. He was just such a pleasure. I mean, I had all my meals with him. I hung out with him and his wife and my dad. And I mean, he was incredible too, like beyond incredible. That's the reason why we won. But that whole tournament and experience was amazing.
What was the biggest culture shock when it came to the game of hockey when you went overseas?
Well, my first year, I wasn't a big hitter or fighter in North America, but I still used to throw my body here and there and get mixed, get involved a little bit. Anyways, I get to Switzerland, and they have exhibition tournaments, and I start throwing these big hits and whatever, and then all of a sudden, all these guys on my team are like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know. Like, I'm just the guy had his head down. Like, I hit him." And they're like, no. We don't do this here. And you don't hit guys hard. And in North America, when there's a big hit, everyone's like going nuts. In Europe, they whistle. They're like, it's like they don't like it. So I realized really quick, like, okay, if you don't want me to hit, I won't hit. It's easier on my body. But so it's like, yeah, they don't like big hits. And my own team was like turning against me my first few games because they were like, what are you hitting these guys for? I was like, I don't know. Like, this is the way we play. So I think that was sort of the biggest shock for me, was just like, there's no body contact there.
What were your team colors? Curious, because I have a follow-up here.
We were red and white. Yeah.
Okay, so when you had to wear that funny little yellow helmet for the top scorer, I'm assuming you had to wear that. Did you look funny?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you were like, what am I wearing?
Yeah,
What is going
kind
on?
of went. Yeah. So at first it was like, what the hell is this? I literally couldn't understand. Like, it looks like not only you're wearing a different helmet, you're wearing a different jersey.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was weird, but I mean, you get used to it. I mean, like I said, to me, if you're not going to play full time in the NHL, Switzerland is probably definitely the best country to go to. I mean, it's the only one I know, but hearing stories from other guys, unless you're going to go to the KHL and make, really tons of money, Switzerland, what a life there. Just, it's gorgeous. And like I said, there's no travel really. You're sleeping. In 5 years in Switzerland, I didn't spend one night in a hotel. Not one night. You never spend a night in a hotel. So it was like heaven. So yeah, so it was a great experience for me. Yeah, big time.
It's hard to imagine any kid growing up in Quebec without becoming a hockey fan for sure, and a hockey player likely. You mentioned those roots, and obviously the Montreal Canadiens. Who had the greatest influence on you as a player when you got into the game?
I'll be honest, I actually sort of blame the reason why I didn't play in the NHL on my parents, because I grew up skiing and I didn't touch the ice till I was 11 years old. So we grew up skiing, and although I always loved hockey as a kid and street hockey, I taught myself how to skate through rollerblading. And my first time ever on the ice was 11. But I you know what? I think just watching the Canadians. I mean, I loved Pavel Bure as a kid. I mean, I used to watch stories, watch games and videos. Him and Brett Hull were sort of my two biggest idols. And my biggest forte for me playing hockey was my release, my shot. And I remember at a young age, two things happened to me. One, Brett Hull, I remember watching one of my first games that I ever went to at the Montreal Forum was against St. Louis, and Brett Hull was playing. And I remember watching him, and he had that amazing shot. And also my dad had a pretty cool job, and he got Gordie Howe. I can send you guys a picture of this after. He got Gordie Howe to come to one of our practices and come on the ice. And you know, it was so funny because in Montreal, Gordie Howe came on the ice at 7. We were done by 8. By 8:00, the entire arena was like almost full in like 1 hour. But that was really cool. And I really sat and talked to him after about, I mean, at the time I was young and I didn't realize, I knew who he was, but like I really didn't sort of understand. And he was telling me to do these wrist curls. His forearms were like massive. It was insane. And I remember literally after that practice, every single night for the next 2, 3, 4 years, just taking a stick and, you know, doing those wrist curls and you know, that really resonated with me, like sitting and talking to him after.
I know growing up in Montreal, you got a chance to talk with quite a few Habs when you were younger. Was there one that was always your favorite or a conversation that you remember?
Yeah, Gilbert Dion. I don't know if you guys remember him.
We've had him on the
We've
podcast.
had him on the podcast.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I loved him. He also came to one of our practices. And he was a great guy. So there was him, and then there was also Shane Corson. So Shane Corson, who I still speak to this day. So Shane Corson also has Crohn's, and he really suffered through it in the OHL, and he obviously went on to have an amazing career. But he did such a selfless thing. So at the time when I got sick, I was actually in the hospital, and my parents air flew me from Sault Ste. Marie to Montreal to be at home in the hospital and see the doctors. And it was in the paper, you know, that I was in the hospital, and you know, because like I said, I was the number 1 rated player in Quebec the year before going into the OHL draft and the Quebec League draft. So it was a big story. And one day after practice, he saw the article, and he just walked over to the hospital. And he came into my room, and we were all like, I was there with my parents and my brother at the time. Like, this guy is, you know, he's like one of the best players, you know, on the Canadians. And he was just an amazing player to watch. And he just came and he sat with me. He's like, I saw your story. And he's like, I wanted to come over. And that was one of the coolest moments for me that I've had, like, through hockey and meeting hockey players. And, you know, this guy was he played also in the Olympics. You know, he was an amazing player. And for him to just sit with me, and then I would go for breakfast with him, you know, in the summer, and I would call him, and, you know, he would tell me to come out golf with him and go for lunch. And that was an amazing, amazing story, and something like that I'll never forget.
You know, it's funny listening to that. I had the privilege of doing a charity event with Shane not too many years ago, where he was a keynote and spoke very openly about breaking down the stigma associated with mental health. So I assume from your perspective, seeing him be this kind of ambassador today is no surprise whatsoever.
Yeah, literally no surprise. And like I said, for a guy to just walk over to the hospital after practice and just find my room and come and sit with me and say, if you ever need anything, he gave me his number. Like, it was incredible. And like I said, I still speak to him, you know, here and there, like 20 years later, 25 years later.
Are you still a Habs fan now?
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge Habs fan. Yeah.
Don't think I didn't notice when you said earlier you've been able to see them win a couple of Stanley Cups. You're younger than me. I'm a Leafs fan. I've never seen them win a Stanley Cup.
Yeah, no, definitely a huge Habs fan. I actually live in Florida now. I'm married and have a kid in Florida. And I always told my wife, like, I have 2 non-negotiables. It's the Habs and the Buffalo Bills. Our son could be, if you want, he could be a Miami Heat, even though I like the Raptors. She's Miami. She went to the University of Miami, so she likes the Hurricanes, even though I'm a Michigan fan. But I'm like, those teams, fine. But Canadians and Bills are non-negotiables, you know? So I'm still a huge, you know, when the Canadians went last year, when they went to the Cup, you know, I went to as many games as I could. I was there when they clinched it against Vegas and won in overtime. I still have like the gold Caulfield t-shirts. Like, you know, I'm still like a huge fan when it comes to the Canadians.
You talked about growing up. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, any chance when you're in Vegas, you'd skate or go by the bench or see Pete DeBoer and say, hey, remember when I torched your team in junior?
Yeah. It's funny because I remember him after I spoke to him after the game when I scored my 48th, 49th, and 50th goal. And he said to me, he's like, Spot and I literally told the guys, like, I don't care what happens tonight. You do not let this guy score goals. He's like, I don't care if you slash him, if you break his hand, don't let him score any goals. And ended up getting 3. But yeah, I had some good, I had a good rapport, good relationship with Pete.
How many would you have had if they didn't have that rule? Hey,
Yeah.
It's the only thing they're trying to do, and you still put up a hat trick.
That was a pretty magical night for me. That was pretty cool.
You talked about growing up skiing, and I'm assuming you were skiing at Camp Wingate, where your parents actually met. And awesomely, who's the owner of Camp Wingate now?
Me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
A little
exactly.
full
Yeah,
circle,
so
eh?
that's a really crazy story. It's a camp that I grew up going to as a kid. Again, another cool story from that is the previous owner, when we were kids, he would have the Canadians, come in for the day. And at the time, we only had a rollerblade rink. And I remember Eric Desjardins, Matthew Schneider, like these guys would come up for the day, and it was like the coolest thing ever. So now that's what I try to do, for the kids that are there. Brad Boys has come, Carlo came. So I try to get some NHLers to come every summer to see the kids. But yeah, it's a really cool story. I grew up going to this camp, and my parents met there as kids. My grandparents were one of the first campers to go to that camp. And after I retired from hockey, I love kids, and everywhere that I played, I always used to volunteer wherever it was. And, it was always something that, I was good at. And it was always something that I always wanted to, to make kids happy, and especially through sport. And now, yeah, I've owned the camp. We're going into our 8th summer, and there's nothing I'd rather be doing.
So from your experiences, Cory, what do you try to instill in these kids that come through your camp?
I think a big one is sort of, and I learned that, in hockey and, being a part of team, and you hear a lot about people who are kids that are bullied, and everything is, for me, is just including everyone. You're not always going to love everyone in your cabin, just like you're always going to love everyone on your team, but the respect factor. And I was always someone who would include everyone. I never wanted to leave anyone out. And, that's something today that when I go speak to the kids, whether it's the cool kids or whatever it is, it's like, you're, include everyone. It's going to make you feel better, and it'll make them feel better. And as you grow up, you'll understand that, life is about helping people and making people feel good, and doing what you can to help sort of humanity. And being a bully is just, it's not cool. And that's sort of my biggest thing that I like to pass on.
How important was it for you that even after retirement, you stayed involved in the game?
Big time.
Yeah.
I'm a huge, growing up, I played every sport. So I still play hockey here in Miami. As soon as when I moved here, I found a league. I still play once. We're actually in the finals right now. I still play once a week. I coach a banding team here. So I love everything about it, and my son's only 3 weeks old, but I'm told my wife I'm going to get him on skates as soon as I can. But I love the game. I love sports. I love everything about it. I love what it teaches you. So I definitely want to stay involved with it, as long as I can.
What's that men's night or men's league like? Good skate?
So it's actually crazy. When they asked me to play, like I found this league and they're like, yeah, it's like the A-League here in Florida. And I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, like I knew the age range was there, the guy told me it's mostly guys in between 20 and 30, and I'm 40 now. So, but I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I'm sure like, I could still keep up, and my hockey IQ is probably good enough to, control the game. And I was like, get out there, and these guys are flying around and hacking. And I'm like, holy shit, this isn't what I signed up for. So our team's in the finals right now. They've never won this. So I'm going to hope to help them win it. And then I'll probably retire, and I'm going to go over to the over 40 league, because like I told my wife, like I went through my whole career with my teeth, even though I wear a full cage now and everything, like these guys take it way too seriously. And it's like, I just, I think I'm going to retire and head over to the other league next year.
I was wondering if
I was going to say 15 years playing pro and you're back in a bird cage. Who would have thought?
Oh my, exactly. Like, so the first game I wore a half visor, and that was it. I was like, I couldn't believe like these guys, like they're, you're not allowed hitting, but they would hit, like it's the type of game where they're in front of the net and they're going to hack you and cross check you to get the, the rebound. And I'm like, I don't even wear shoulder pads. Like I just go out there in elbow pads, a helmet. Like I'm not getting cross checked. Like, but like it's a really good skate. I was actually shocked, but a lot of these guys play D3 and they're younger, and so it's a really good skate. But I don't think I'm gonna.
You just got to tell them, no, we don't do that here. We don't do that.
Yeah, I said like I'm 40, guys. Like there, you want the rebound? Like take it. Like
I would have thought there would have been when Cory Pecker's on the market as a free agent for this league, they'd be like, hey, the competition to get the guy who's got 50 tucks in his back pocket.
Yeah. So a bunch of the teams wanted me, but like also I'm older, and but it was an eye opener to see like how fast it is. Cause it really is. Like I played in a league in Montreal after I retired and it was okay. But you know what, when you play with a bunch of pros, that's the thing. When you play with a bunch of guys who played their whole career and played every day for 20 years, like no one's going 100 miles an hour. You know what I mean? The game's different. You know, guys are a little bit smarter with the puck, nowhere to go, nowhere to be. Here, everyone's just sort of skating all over the place. So you're like, what the heck's going on? It's like, this is not what I remember. Guys are just like yeah, it's crazy. So
it's almost harder. I found trying to go to men's league. It was like, this is impossible.
Absolutely, especially in a league like this, because you're like, you have the puck, you're like, okay, a guy should be here, nowhere to be found. You know, like they're just, who knows. So but it's all right.
It's fun. It sounds like a great place to be living these days. I'd much rather be where you are than the -18 we've got here tonight.
Yeah. I speak to my family and my friends in Montreal all the time, and yeah, being here in the winter has been a blessing. So, and we get to go back in the summer for the camp. So living in Florida all winter and being in Canada in the summer is a pretty good gig.
So I know we've kept you a while here, and it's usually about this point where Firewall tries to wrap it up, and I say that I have one more question.
He always has one more, Corey.
My one more question is a wide open one for you, whether it be Sault Ste. Marie, Erie, Cincy, Manitoba, overseas, Switzerland. Is there one player that you thought we were going to ask about, or that we should ask about a good story, and that we didn't?
Oh, wow.
And is it Randy Carlyle?
So yeah, I wasn't in Manitoba long, but man, I felt like his wrath. I went there, and I wasn't at the time, since he had all these guys, and I went there, and I get there and he puts me right on the first line. I don't know, you guys remember Peter Sarno? Played in Sarnia, I think.
Yep.
So I played with Sarno and this guy Lee Gorin, I think his name was. Good player, actually. And I'm on the first line, and first game I have like a goal and an assist, and I'm like, all right, this is amazing. Okay, after the game, next day of practice, I'm on the fourth line. Like, I don't understand. Like, we won. I had a goal and assist, like, you know, and then he comes out to me. He's like, oh, I forget that I can't swear on these podcasts, but he's just giving it to me. He's like, if you want to play for me, he's like, you got to play defense. If you don't play defense, I don't care how many goals you score. You're not playing on the top line. He's like, you're going out of the fort. And this was like my second day with the team. I flew in, played the game, and like, it was the next day. And like by the end of that season, I was in the playoffs. I was like a healthy scratch, and you know, so my time with him wasn't amazing. But obviously, a guy who was another, you know, kind of like the Babcock story. It's like I was the problem, not these guys. These guys had amazing NHL careers, amazing coaches, won Stanley Cups, and so looking back at it, it's like I was the issue. It wasn't them, obviously. You know, now 20 years later, I could laugh about it, But yeah, he talk about an intimidating guy. He was so intimidating. Wow. Like, he was just really intimidating. And we had Kessler at the time, and him and Kessler would go at it, but obviously Kessler was, you know, I wasn't Ryan Kessler. So,
Kessler.
Kessler. So they had a crazy relationship. They would just go back and forth. But yeah, he was a tough guy to play for.
Well, you were a tough guy to play against, and a lot of players of your era will attest to that. And I'm sure they're going to enjoy, and all the fans that watch it too, listening to this podcast this week. Really appreciate you making the time for us and catching up like this. It's been great. Thank you.
Of course. I'm going to call Carlo after this, see if I can get him on.